As parents, this film is vital because you just said we need to look around the world and see what's going on. This documentary was put together for the purpose of demonstrating where we are as a culture. And Justin Folk is a husband and a father, and Matt Walsh is a husband and a father, and they're invested in the culture around us because they are also raising children too.
Erin, have you ever been sitting here podcasting with me and at the same time you wondered whether or not you were actually podcasting with me?
Never.
Okay, well, have you ever wondered whether or not your perception of reality is completely mistaken and that you are not in this moment actually podcasting with me? Your perception of truth and reality is just completely off. Have you wondered that?
Never. Now, I've wondered about your perception of reality at times, but I've
Erin,
never actually wondered.
Erin, seriously, seriously, have you ever thought maybe I'm a butterfly dreaming this very moment, and that you're not actually here as a human person doing a podcast, but you're a butterfly and you're dreaming right now?
No.
You've never thought that?
I've never.
You're way behind the times. Because in these times where truth is up for grabs, you've got to be thinking about these things because your perception of reality may be way off. And let me tell you, I think it is. Okay, now I know you're laughing, but this is where our culture is at, Erin. And today we want to talk about the idea of truth in our culture, because in this cultural moment, in the 21st century, we live in what some refer to as a post-truth culture.
Meaning
post-truth refers to circumstances in which objective facts, objective truth, play little to no role in persuading people, in convincing people, in helping them to know reality. But what is held up above that is someone's desires or feelings and or their own perception.
the pursuit of truth is no longer a value.
It all depends on what you mean by truth. If you mean objective facts and reality, that's not really the value, because you and I maybe don't have access to that. We can't know that. Instead, what really matters is your truth. Erin, what is your truth? Please tell us your truth, because I want you to live your truth right now.
No, you don't.
Okay, so look, maybe we're being facetious, but really this is where our culture's at. Yeah, we just got done watching a documentary. Maybe you've seen it. It's called "What Is a Woman?" Put out by the Daily Wire. There's a social commentary. Matt Walsh was the primary narrator for that, or I guess he was the only narrator. He goes around interviewing people. Now, look, whether or not you like the Daily Wire or you like Matt Walsh is kind of irrelevant to the point we're going to make. Okay, so don't let that be a hindrance for you if you don't like them, or you think Matt Walsh is kind of harsh in his engagement with critics and that kind of thing. That's fine. In fact, I think one of the things we need to do is, as Christians, as believers, we've got to mature beyond dismissing claims and ideas and truth because of the source it comes from, right? So whether it's watching Fox News or CNN or MSNBC or wherever, you can't simply dismiss a claim merely on the basis of where it comes from. Now, that doesn't mean you might not have more trusted sources, but something can be true no matter who utters it, and that's what we want to get after. So he does this documentary. I actually think it was a really good documentary. I think the question is a really good question. He goes around asking, what is a woman? Because we live in a culture where people cannot define what a woman is.
Well, actually, I'll just say one thing I liked about it was you said he was the main narrator of the film. I think actually he doesn't offer a lot of narration in the film. I mean, I know you. I mean, he's the main character, but what I loved about the film was that he went this question, what is a woman? He just kept coming back to that, asking different people and letting them talk.
Yeah.
And that was kind of actually the brilliance of it, is that he just asked the question and let them answer. And then he would maybe have a follow-up question, or if they didn't answer the question, he would ask it again. So I think even if you don't subscribe to the Daily Wire, it's a conservative news source, that's fine. I think you can still appreciate the film because, well, Matt Walsh is like poker face, deadpan, asks people the question, and he goes to quote unquote experts around the country.
Well, actually, it wouldn't be quote unquote, because you just recently talked to the producer of the documentary, right?
Yeah.
And he told you, a guy named Justin Folk, and he told you they chose like the top people.
Yeah. Yeah, actually he said they purposely tried to interview the people who were the top in the field. So the top doctor who does these transition surgeries on people, the top pediatrician who's prescribing hormones. So they did go out. The reason I'm saying quote unquote is because they're hailed as experts, but as you watch the film, it's utter absurdity what they're claiming. For example, the pediatrician who gives hormones, she talks about that you can start hormone therapy, and then if they want to stop, you just turn it off. And it's like flipping a switch, and it's no big deal. You start the hormones if the kid wants them, and then you turn them off if they change their mind. As if there's no physical effects. She's pretending. Yeah. So this is why insanity. I mean, quote unquote.
That's insanity. That's absurd. It's not scientific. And so let's go ahead and reinsert those scare quotes that you put. Let's put those back in.
That's why, I say quote unquote experts, because in the film, the people who actually their ideas match up most with reality are a small shop owner in San Francisco. And there was another one I was thinking too. I can't think of who the other one. But these common sense answers that they were getting, a lot of times was just coming from like normal people, what we would call normal
not
people.
Not the quote unquote experts.
That's where they were fine. Oh, I know where it was. They fly all the way to Africa to do an interview in a tribe. And these are just, normal people. And
tribesmen who live in the bush.
Yeah.
Live in thatched huts.
Yeah. And I think, I'm assuming probably the idea was this idea that gender is a social construct and it's a Western idea. So I'm assuming that was part of why they went out of the West, went to Africa. And then he asked again, just as deadpan, just as simple, what is a woman? And they're like, what do you mean? The women can give birth. And they start, what is a man? And they just describe it very common sense. What we all know is true.
Common sense. Even think about that phrase. Common sense. Common sense is no longer common anymore.
Yeah.
In this culture. And so this is what this documentary is covering. It's really trying to get at what is the truth? What are the objective facts about a woman that help us to identify what a woman is, to define what a woman is. And Matt Walsh, kind of early on in the documentary, he's doing these interview with kind of the person on the street. And so there's this one in particular that's I think it's in probably the first 10 or 15 minutes of the documentary. And he's talking to this lady, and he asks, he's asking her the question, what is a woman? Well, and I think they pick up the conversation maybe somewhere midway in.
Are you sure she's a lady?
No, I'm going to go ahead and assume her gender. Okay. Yeah, I still have common sense. So I'm for sure that was a woman. No, so the woman says, what's true to you can be false to me. I mean, just think about that for a second. In fact, think about how you'd evaluate that. In what ways would you evaluate that statement itself? What's true to you can be false to me. So if I say that 2 + 2 = 4, and that's true or true to me, you're saying that 2 + 2 = 4 could be false to you, right? Well, and so Matt, he engages her. He says, what if I said my truth is that you don't exist? Does that mean you no longer exist? Here's the woman's response. If that's your truth, sure, I don't, meaning she doesn't exist. He says, but you do. She responds, I mean, if you're saying that I do, then I do. Matt says, well, but even if I said that you don't, you still do because we're having this conversation. And she says, I mean, are we? And he says, I think so. And she says, well, if that's what you think.
It's so ridiculous. I mean, you watch this conversation. This is why, he's just letting people answer the questions, and you're sitting there watching, and it's complete absurdity. This woman does not live this way. She doesn't live this way. Assume she's married, and then
now you're getting into our. You're getting into the body of our teaching here on truth.
Okay, sorry.
I don't want you to give away the house here, okay? I know you're anxious. Okay. I know you don't like the absurdities, Erin,
I'll just say,
and you're chomping at the bit.
This is unlivable. Continue.
But yeah, well, so this is a conversation with, these two gals, and just one of them was doing the talking, but just on the, kind of the street corner. And then a little bit later on, he goes to the University of Tennessee. He interviews a professor. It's a professor of women, gender, and sexuality studies, Patrick, I think it's Grzanka, Grzanka. Okay. And so they're sitting down in the office talking about, this whole idea of women and gender studies. And so Matt Walsh, right, from the Daily Wire says, if we're talking about a trans woman has all, and meaning she has all of the male physical characteristics, would that not be a male then? Couldn't we plainly say this person is a male? So the professor responds and says, well, why are you asking the question? I want to understand why that's so important. All right, so then they go back and forth a little bit. Matt Walsh says, well, I'm just trying to start by getting to the truth, because this professor kind of puts up some resistance. So Matt says, I'm just trying to start by getting to the truth. And the professor, you see, the countenance changes. And he says, yeah, I'm really uncomfortable with that language of getting to the truth. And Matt says, why is that uncomfortable? And the professor says, it sounds deeply transphobic to me. Matt says, truth? Yes, truth sounds transphobic, right? The professor says, if you keep probing, we're going to stop the interview. Matt says, if I probe about what the truth is? And the professor says, you keep invoking the word truth, which is condescending and rude. And then Matt says, how is the word truth condescending and rude? Okay, I mean, you read these, or you watch these, and you think, okay, yeah, these people are just, they're out there. They're, they're affirming absurdities for whatever reason. And I mean, no one really thinks like this. And I think what we want to do is help people see that no, people think like this. Yeah. Now, there's some of you out there who may already know this, but I think it's important for us to spend time looking around the culture, evaluating it, really getting in touch with it, to know the context, the cultural context that our kids are growing up in.
Yeah, I think that's why watching this movie would be important for everyone to do. The whatisawoman.com is the website. You could go there and and to watch the movie if you haven't.
Can you watch? Can you watch it for free on the? Or
you have to subscribe. It's kind of like Justin, the director and producer, who the other podcast I do, Strong Women Podcast with the Cochle.
Wait, you do another podcast? What, you've been cheating on me?
Oh my gosh!
And this is the first time I'm hearing about it live on television?
So my friend Sarah and I interviewed Justin Folk, who is the director and producer of the film, who is a Christian. And he was talking to us about the movie. So yeah, Daily Wire's a subscription, kind of like Netflix.
So you have to subscribe to the Daily Wire.
Yeah, but it's like a month by month subscription is what he said.
Okay,
so
I just want to make clear for our listeners, you got to pay some money.
You do. And we're suggesting you do that. We're
that good.
We're not benefiting from this. We think it's that good. And we think as parents, this film is vital because you just said we need to look around the world and see what's going on. This documentary was put together for the purpose of demonstrating where we are as a culture. And Justin Folk is a husband and a father. And Matt Walsh is a husband and a father, and they're invested in the culture around us because they are also raising children too.
Yeah.
And so they purposely sought after people who are at the top of their fields in these areas that, again, quote unquote experts. And this professor, for example, is a gender studies professor. When he's asked the simple question, what is a woman? Cannot give an answer. When Matt asks about truth, he gets visibly upset by the word truth.
And he's Justin told you he was a tenured professor. So this isn't like some crazy adjunct who teaches one or two classes.
At like Berkeley or something, where people think, oh, Berkeley, California, all you people are crazy. This isn't Tennessee. This is in the Bible Belt of our country. So they purposely picked the people they did for being at the top of their fields, but also of just reflective of what's going on.
Yeah. And here you have this PhD really taking offense to Matt even raising the question of truth and reality. So you might hear these examples, these stories. It's on the college campus. It's a crazy interview on the street. And you might think, these are just crazy people out there. This is not mainstream. This is not the normal folks. And what you heard from Justin was, no, these are mainstream folks. These are a tenured professor. This is the top pediatrician. This is not just some crazy college student, studying philosophy their freshman year, uttering these things. In fact, we have an example from our own church. We're involved with the church plant here in Southern California right now. And a gal in our church just in the last few weeks had to deal with these kind of views on truth. And this gal, she's a college-age gal at our church. Let's just call her Emily to protect the innocent, okay? Emily had this new manager position at this store in Southern California. And she was brought in because they let go of the other manager who wasn't doing a good job and wasn't managing the employees well. She gets in there. She realizes, hey, this manager was kind of doing all the stuff for the employees and it wasn't getting them to do their jobs. She was doing their jobs for them. So she starts trying to get these girls to do their jobs, which is, what you should be doing if you're an employee. So anyway, the girls don't like this. They're not used to this. They get upset. Emily has to confront them and talk to them and, try to correct their behavior. And one of the girls gets upset. And when she gets confronted, she, goes a little ballistic and then gives her 2-week notice and quits. And, on the way out, she starts leveling accusations of racism against Emily. And then another employee who was her friend, I think it's like an 18 and 19-year-old, friends working together. The other employee, 10 minutes later after the conversation, sends a message, I'm giving my 2 weeks notice, and jumps in on the accusations of racism. So poor Emily, who is this, just so sweet, so kind, not a confrontive type person, not gruff or,
intimidating.
Not intimidating, very sweet. she then has to go in front of an HR rep with her boss, who had been coaching her all along the way, telling her, you're doing a good job, you're doing the right thing. This is, you know, you're on the right track. And so she's sitting there, and it's a Zoom call. She's sitting there with the HR rep, with her boss, and then she's having to explain this. Because
now they're doing an investigation because claims of racism have been made.
Yes. And of course, you know, in this day and age, if you get accused of racism, I mean, that could be it. Mm-hmm. It's cancel culture time here, right? And so in response to the accusations of racism, Emily ends up saying to the HR rep, well, what really matters here is what actually happened. Truth and reality are what matter. And I know that in reality, I'm not a racist, nor was I racist, you know, in this, example that they were giving. And the HR rep stops her and says, no. Truth and reality don't matter in this situation. People's feelings are what matter. That's almost word for word what she said. This is what the HR rep said. Truth and reality don't matter. People's feelings are what matter. This is not just crazy people out there. This kind of thinking now is playing itself out everywhere. Mm-hmm. This manager having to deal with this from HR. Now, Emily gave a great response to the HR person.
Yeah, oh, yeah. That's when she says, you know, a little bit later on, she says, well, that's crazy. If truth and reality don't matter, then I can say you're being racist to me in this investigation. And then the HR lady gets really upset and says, that's ridiculous. No, you cannot say that. And scolds her for making such a claim, which to me, I thought was so brilliant that she did that because
she's been trained well by her church and by her pastors.
So you're taking credit by her teachers. For that.
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe just a little.
But it was a brilliant thing to do because the lady says truth and reality don't matter. Feelings matter. Okay, well then what about my feelings? Now I'm going to say, I feel like you're being racist to me.
And based on what the HR lady said, that would be a completely valid,
Yes. Why isn't that legitimate?
Yeah, legitimate claim.
Yeah.
So if truth and reality don't matter, and I feel this way, well, now you're being racist to me. I mean, and you see how reality falls apart on this view. Everything falls apart on this view. It's just chaos. And, oh gosh, it's stunning. It's stunning. But I think what we're trying to do here is just give everyone a sense that this is the culture that our young people are growing up in. And I thought the day of a, kind of a subjective view of truth, we dealt with relativism a lot 15 years ago, 20 years ago. And I thought, the culture's waking up. It's just too common sense. You can't deny truth. I mean, it's just completely irrational. And we've doubled down. Our culture's doubled down on this. And now we're denying truth and reality. So this is what our kids are growing up in. They're growing up in a post-truth culture. And so...
Yeah, so it's no longer, I'm just thinking, it's no longer like it used to be, that's your truth, my truth, I have my truth. Now it's like truth's completely off the table. It's just, I feel this way, and that's what matters. I mean, of course, they're still kind of in the your truth, my truth, but it is shifting to a lot of talk about feelings, and that
desires,
is, yeah.
And
that's the main thing to consider is feelings, not truth.
Yeah, that's the whole issue in identity, right? Creating an identity is merely up to me, my desires, my wants, my feelings, whatever. But it's centered in me, the individual. And it has nothing to do with some objective reality out there. So how do we teach our kids about truth? How do we equip them with the truth? How do we help them navigate a post-truth culture like this that has descended into some craziness?
We tell them to never work for a company that has a HR department.
We just...
No, I mean, that's
we give up and
we just give up. We throw in the towel. Just forget it. No, but I mean, this is where you and I go a lot of times. You know, it's like we hear the things, we watch the movie, and then, of course, for us, we have kids in this culture. How on earth do we equip our kids to navigate this culture when they could be put in a job where a boss is going to say to them, truth and reality don't matter?
Yeah. Well,
how do we navigate it with our kids?
This is where we have to help them understand ideas have consequences. Ideas have consequences. Our ideas about truth itself, about truth and reality, have huge consequences. And that should just be a mantra in every Christian home, right? We should catechize our kids with that statement. Ideas have consequences. And then show them how. And I think here's what we want to do with our time today is number one, help you to feel this, help you to feel the pressure of this, so it motivates you as a parent, as a grandparent, as a teacher, as a youth leader, whoever's out there listening, to address this regularly. And so what we first want to do is just talk about, I guess, the content, if you will, the issue of truth and reality itself, because you and I, as people who are stakeholders in the lives of young people and who are discipling them, we ourselves must have a solid grasp and a solid understanding of truth. And so that's maybe the starting place, is understanding truth.
Yeah, I'm just thinking as you're talking, like if we are followers of Jesus, if that is a serious commitment that we make and want our kids to do the same, you know, and Jesus's words, I am the way and the truth and the life. So he's the truth. Jesus is the truth. So just by the very nature of who we follow, this should matter to us, and it should be a pillar in our home of truth, that the truth matters.
Yeah, we see truth and knowledge all throughout the scriptures. I think of Jesus' words in John 17:3, that he says eternal life. He's defining eternal life, and he says eternal life is knowing the only true God, the one true God. If there's one true God and other people are putting up other conceptions or pictures of God, then those are by definition false gods. Eternal life is connected to knowing the one true God. Hey, you can worship other gods, you can put your faith in other gods, but if they're not real, if they're false gods, they're not going to be able to secure your eternal life. And so this is vital. So not only does it have these ideas have consequences for this life, they have consequences for all of eternity. And Scripture just assumes that truth and reality are part of this whole deal. Okay, so how are, you know, what in terms of the content of truth and just knowing truth, you know, we've kind of wrestled with, all right, how do we make this somewhat easy to understand or common sense to understand? Right? Because we got to do some careful thinking about truth. And it just seems that the default position, right, is that there is truth. There are true things. Whatever they are, there are true things about the universe. I mean, let's just take the phrase or the statement, the universe exists. Right? That's a true statement. Or you or I exist. It's a true statement. It's self-evident. And now that doesn't mean people can't deny it. But it's just self-evident. It's common sense. You want to deny that, I think the burden of proof is on you. So if that's just kind of the standard default position, then what we want to do is kind of put it back on the person who's denying truth and saying, you got to convince me that there is no truth in reality, or that I just have mine and you have yours, and you know, or whatever the view is. And I think here's a way to kind of organize it. Whenever someone denies objective truth, denials of objective truth are always going to be irrational, number one. So they're going to be irrational because they're going to violate basic laws of logic. Laws of logic aren't laws that we've determined or we've created as human beings. They're laws that we've discovered about the nature of the universe we live in. They govern human thought and communication. Okay, if these laws weren't weren't true, weren't already in place, we couldn't even communicate. So like the law of non-contradiction is a very important logical law that we need in this discussion, which the law of non-contradiction says that A can't be A and non-A in the same time and in the same way.
So
at
say
the same
that,
time in the same way.
Say that in English in a way that
I was gonna get to that. I was gonna but this is where, hey, I mean, a little encouragement. As you equip young people, teach them logic. And if you're sitting there going, well, I don't know logic myself, that's fine. Learn it with them.
yes.
Like the church has got to recapture logic. And we should be teaching our people to be thinking logically, to know the laws of logic so that they are not suckered into horrible ideas like this that have huge consequences, okay? So what we're saying is basically two opposite ideas cannot both be true at the same time. I mean, that's kind of the A, can't be A and non-A at the same time. So, specific example, the earth cannot be spherical or round and flat at the same time, right? And in the same way. Okay, those two statements are contradictory. And so just think about how all of our communication is built on that. It just assumes that. So when I say, Erin, I'm going to the store, you don't wonder whether that means I'm staying at home or I'm going to the ball game, or I mean, right? You realize that means that I'm going to the store and I'm not going to the store and doing something else. And if that's not in place, you can't even communicate, right? So that's what I mean. This is so fundamental. And so denials of objective truth are irrational in that they violate basic laws of logic. So it can be something as simple as if someone says there is no truth, right? What have they done? They've made a truth claim. And it's a self-contradictory truth claim, right? And the question you want to respond with is, if your claim is that there is no truth, well, then is that claim itself true, right? Apply that to the claim itself. There is no truth. Is it true that there is no truth? Someone says, well, you can't know the truth. You can't know the truth about reality. Is that something you know about reality, right? Is that a truth you know about reality? It's going to be you see the self-contradiction. Someone says, well, all truth is relative. Okay, the claim, all truth is relative. Is that truth itself relative to you simply because you believe it and it doesn't apply to me? On and on and on. So it can be as basic as that. When you deny truth, it's irrational, it's self-defeating, self-refuting. But of course, in our culture, we'll talk about it in more sophisticated language. And so here's what people will say. They'll say, well, these things, kind of truth and reality are social constructs. Now that sounds sophisticated. That sounds intellectual. Okay. Well, what's a social construct? It means that somehow in my thinking of the world, I construct the nature of reality. And I'm not actually getting at reality itself. It's just my thinking about it. So of course, what's the big claim? Gender is a social construct. But so if everything is a social construct, we can ask, is the idea that everything is a social construct itself? Meaning we just created that ourselves. And that's actually not the nature of reality. Is a social construct simply a social construct? Or are you saying that that is an objective description of what we're doing? So you can't get away from the irrationality of denying truth. Whenever you undermine truth like that, you undermine common sense and you find self-contradiction. Yeah,
this is where the interview of the lady on the street in the What is a Woman documentary, this is where she goes, I guess in her defense, she tries to follow the logic of her idea.
That's right.
But that logic leads her to ridiculous places where she's saying, I don't know. Maybe I don't. If you don't think I exist, then I don't. But she knows she exists.
Yeah. Which gets us to the second critique. But before we get there, I want to say can I say one more thing? Is that okay? Because what I'm going to say is true. Okay, so thinking now more about truth, all right, and so it's irrational. But let's get a definition of truth out there. And the definition, I think, which is the true definition of truth, or the accurate description of truth, would be what philosophers call the correspondence theory of truth, or the correspondence view of truth. And that sounds like, all philosophical. It's common sense. Truth is that which corresponds to reality. Truth is that which matches up to reality. That's it. That's the common sense view. That's the view that actually every one of us lives out every single day, right? And so...
Yeah, I think the argument is that everyone has their own reality. That's what the woman on the street is saying.
Yeah.
Your reality can be that I don't exist.
Yeah.
Now, of course, her reality is that she does exist.
Yeah.
So whose reality wins out, kind of thing.
Well, and that's why this
unlivable.
This is why this definition in this view of truth is so important,
right?
Because it makes an appeal to the thing that is the arbiter of truth. So, you got your claim, and you could make the claim. You got your own reality. I got my own reality. All right. Well, what's going to weigh in here that's going to help us to know whose claim is actually true? Reality itself. Okay. But I think this is an important idea to teach our kids. We should be talking to our kids this way. Truth is that which matches up with reality. And it doesn't matter if everyone in the world disagrees. If everyone in the world says that the earth is flat, doesn't make it so.
Yeah.
There is an objective, there's an objective truth, an objective reality that's out there. So here's another way you could talk about truth. Truth is true whether anyone believes it or not. It's objective, meaning there's something that is true about the object. The word object is in the word objective. There's something that's true about the object itself, and that's what makes the claim true, the object that you're discussing, or the claim that you're making. So, we could talk about the distinction between objective and subjective, but I don't want to confuse. I don't want to add another concept here. Maybe we'll come back and do another podcast on that. Really, what's key here is thinking about the truth maker, and that's reality. So when I think a thought, when I make a claim, what's the truth maker? What makes that thing true? It's reality itself. That's the key. That's what we need to ground our young people in, because that is what the culture is trying to knock out of us.
Yeah.
And I think the documentary and our experience is showing the culture is successful right now in knocking common sense out of us.
Yeah,
okay?
When she says, I brought up, she would say, that's your reality. I have a different reality. So is that her reality, that everyone has a different reality?
Yeah.
And why should we think that's true? And this is where, sometimes these questions are posed to us and we're kind of taken off guard. I think partially because it's kind of ridiculous. So we're not even sure where to begin. Yeah. But that's why I like, what you're saying is, when someone says there is no truth, and then recognizing, they're making a claim about truth. And so you just put that back on them. Yeah. You believe in truth. That woman believes in reality. The moment she does anything in her day, she believes in reality. Every human interaction she has, and the expectations on how other people will treat her, and everything she does, she's interacting with reality and has not just what she thinks is her own perception, but that reality is really happening all around her, and that it's true.
So there's the second category. You just brought up the second category, I think, to help just people get their mind around this. Number one, denying truth is irrational. Number two, these denials of truth in reality are unlivable.
Okay,
that's what you're saying.
This is what I wanted to get to, because this is why you stopped me earlier.
And before you get to it.
Oh, my word.
I just have so much to say.
You're making me wait so
long. I have so
long.
many true things to say right now. No, so you're going to give this huge, you're going to hit it home here in a second. But I'm going to set you up. I'm going to lob in this easy one for you. No, I think what's important, and I think it's important kind of why we're making this distinction. I mean, because they're two important aspects. Because sometimes we might think, well, okay, well, if in an irrational age, in an irrational age, people, when you make appeals to logic, it might just go in one ear and out the other. And that's true. That doesn't mean we don't still make appeals to logic. Like, we never let go of logic. It's one of God's tools for us to know about his world.
Right.
And so even if it's Christians alone in this culture that are holding on to truth and logic, that's something we can't give up. Now, does that mean it'll be convincing to someone else when you help them see that their point is illogical? Not necessarily. And that's why this second point is so important. And that it's unlivable. They can't actually live out these views. Erin, get ready. Here's your moment. Hit it home.
Well, you kind of took the wind out of my sails.
Oh my gosh.
Okay,
I
so
set you up so beautifully right there.
So when I watch the movie and I hear the woman say to Matt Walsh, do I really exist? Well, if you say I don't, then I don't. This is absurd because she doesn't live that way. I don't live that. No one can live that way because, okay, so this is what I thought right away. She doesn't think that when it comes to all kinds of relationships that she has in her life. For example, if her husband came home one day and was like, today you don't exist, so I have another woman coming over. It's so absurd. She wouldn't just be like, okay, if you say I don't exist, then I don't exist.
If she caught her husband in bed with another woman.
Oh gosh. Yeah. So you went there, but
well, I'm thinking she catches her husband in bed with another woman, and then she opens the door and walks in and goes, "What are you doing?" And he turns and says, "Am I really here? Do I exist?
Do you exist?
Do you exist?
Does she exist?
I don't think so. So therefore you don't. Can you please go away?" Yeah, I mean, would she accept that?
No, of course not. If I think she's walking on the street, and if she was assaulted by a guy, and then the guy says, well, that's your truth that I punched you and stole your purse, but my truth is that I didn't, and you're making this whole thing up.
Yeah.
Imagine she goes to the bank and the bank says, "Oh, our reality is that you don't exist anymore, and so we've absolved your accounts, and all of your money is now ours. You don't exist."
Yeah.
We don't live this. We can't live this way, and we don't live this way, and she doesn't live this way. It's just nonsense. That, like you said, it's like sometimes these things sound so smart. But I guess where I always go, maybe I'm just a very practical person, but I hear that stuff and I think, how does that lived out? And it can't be lived out. She can't live that out for 5 minutes, let alone years and years in her whole life. That's just, it's crazy. And we can't live this way. We don't live this way because reality is out there and we can pretend that it's not, but eventually it's going to smack us in the face. Yeah. Eventually we're going to demand, no, this is reality and this is wrong or this is right, or we start making all kinds of claims.
This is where maybe you can kind of push someone's hot button, so to speak.
Yeah.
I don't mean push their hot button to tick them off, but find out what is something they care about. What is an issue they're invested in? So if I'm a married man, I'm invested in my wife. I care about my wife. And so then take that principle of truth and reality that she's making claims about and apply it to that situation, and then help them see you don't actually live this out. Okay, you're making these claims. I get it. You're trying to be consistent because this is where logic is going to lead you if you hold this view, but you don't actually believe that. How do I know? Because you look both ways before you cross the street. You know that 2 + 2 = 4. That's an objective fact, and you use that same math with your banker, and thankfully your banker uses that with you. I mean, just helping them see this can't be lived out. And there's a time when you're engaging with people, I think, to look them straight in the eye, and maybe for some of you people, relational people, this may be a little too confrontive, but to look someone in the eye and go, "You don't really believe that. I know you don't believe that. because they have to live in this world. And if you can't know truth and you can't know reality, you will be dead very soon. All right. So it's irrational and it's unlivable. And then I think then what we do in the training with our young people is we help them to see the Bible assumes this view. Like you look at the primary word for truth in the Old Testament and the New Testament. In the New Testament, the Greek is aletheia, right? And it communicates the idea of that which is conformed to reality, right? That's the view. It's the common sense view. Truth is that which corresponds to reality. I heard, I think it was Dallas Willard, who's a Christian thinker and philosopher, and it's a good man. He said, reality is what you bump up against when your beliefs are false. And that's actually an important thing to point out, is that when you don't get truth and reality right, their ideas have consequences, and it can really be harmful. So, for instance, let's go back to the documentary, What is a Woman? If we don't get truth and reality right on that question, then we're going to cause a lot of damage. And that's exactly what we're seeing on this gender issue. And that documentary laid out that ideas have consequences. Yeah. And there's all kinds of harm that will come to our young people if they don't know the truth about men and women and the biological realities.
Yeah. One of the most heartbreaking stories of the film is a woman who attempted to transition and had multiple surgeries and
went the whole 9 yards.
Yeah, very, very much looks like a man by all physical appearances. But then she started to show her arm where they had removed skin, and she talked about all of her infections and diseases she has now, and the
likelihood of an early death.
Yeah, and what grief has been brought to her life because she believed things that weren't true. She believed and was told she could become a man.
She was lied to. She was deceived. And the opposite of a lie is the truth.
Yeah.
Right.
And her plea is really that we would not lie to our kids. Yeah. And it's a heart-wrenching part of the film, but it's what you're talking about. And this is why we do need to take it very seriously, because when we have false beliefs, like Dallas Willard said, we'll bump against reality,
or we'll get smacked by reality.
Yeah, and that's painful and to ourselves. But you think about the young people that are in our lives that we are put in charge of, especially our children. And so this matters a great deal.
So I hope that helps to frame things for those who are listening, for parents, for teachers, for whoever. This is how we need to talk about this stuff with our kids. This is what we need to train them to think. We need to help restore their common sense. Even when the world around them is going crazy, they can have confidence that there is truth and that there is reality, and that you better know those things or there's going to be major consequences. Now, let's give a couple resources, and then I think what we're going to do is we're going to do a separate podcast where we talk about some of the really practical things that we can do for it, because we've kind of been philosophical today, and but we've needed to. Christians need to think carefully if we're going to navigate this culture well.
Yeah. So I think next week let's talk about okay, so how do we teach this kind of thing to our 5-year-olds, to our 10-year-olds, to our middle schoolers and high schoolers who are being confronted with these kinds of things.
Yeah, we'll get really practical, which is part of our vision here on the Maven Parent Podcast, is to think carefully and to live well. In fact, I think I just came up with a new slogan for our podcast, right? Think carefully, live well.
Very good.
That was really good. Anyway, here are some resources. Number one, next week, which would be the first week of August, we're teaming up with the Colson Center for Christian Worldview, and I am doing an event in Michigan with John Stone Street and Lee Strobel, and the event is called The Case for Truth, and Lee and I are going to talk about truth, try to equip Christians with the truth, and then John and Lee and I are going to have a conversation on stage about that and answer questions. If you want information on that, they're live streaming that event. So it doesn't matter where you're at in the country. live streaming that event. It starts at 7 o'clock Eastern, Thursday, August the 4th, I believe it is. And you can just go to greatlakessymposium.org. That's greatlakessymposium.org. And we'll post that on the Maven Facebook page. So jump on the Maven Facebook page and we'll post that information. But you can get on, register, and then get access to the live stream. We're going to specifically be talking about truth. And we have some books.
Lots of books. I don't think we pulled it out, but one of my favorite books, that's more of a recent one, but The Story of Reality by Greg Cochle, our friend. I love that book. I went through that book this past school year with junior high and high school students in a logic apologetics class that I teach. It's a great book. And I mean, it was written for adults, I think, but my middle schooler and high school students were tracking along easily. Yeah. And it frames Christianity as a worldview about reality, about how the world really is. And so I think that's a great book. So that's one I would highlight. I also read with them A Student's Guide to Culture, which you and John wrote. So that's another resource to go through with kids. Well, and yourself too. But
yeah. A couple more. Natasha Crane's book, Keeping Your Kids on God's Side, 40 Conversations to Help Them Build a Lasting Faith. In this book, she actually has a specific section, part 2, conversations about truth and worldviews. Mm-hmm. And so she answers questions like, what is the difference between objective and subjective truth? How can Christians claim they know what is objectively true? So that's very helpful. She gives lots
of ideas about conversations, questions to ask your kids and all that. So that's a really helpful book.
And she's a good translator. She can communicate to normal people. This is an older book. It's called Apologetics for a New Generation. Sean McDowell was the editor. And I wrote a chapter in here. It's chapter, let's see, what chapter is it? Chapter 2. It's called Truth Never Gets Old. And it's just a single chapter, but it lays out for you a very helpful view on truth, a common sense view of truth, even lays out a test that you can do with your students. Abdu Murray wrote a book called Saving Truth, Finding Meaning and Clarity in a Post-Truth World. And if you want to get deep on this topic, go to J.P. Moreland. J.P., who we've had on the podcast here, is just such a good thinker. And he's been a pastor, but he's also a philosopher. He will help lay out a very I guess a more sophisticated view, help us to understand and go deeper on this in his book, Kingdom Triangle, which he actually wrote for an audience, the church audience. It's not actually a kind of for, philosophers or grad students or something like that. It is excellent. It is I think one of the most important books out there in the last 20 years, like Kingdom Triangle. And he talks about truth and knowledge. And that one of the things that would invigorate modern evangelical Christianity is recovering the Christian mind. So plenty of resources out there to get equipped on the truth.
And we'll end with this quote from an English cultural critic whose name is Theodore Dalrymple. And this is what he says. He says, political correctness is communist propaganda writ small. In my study of communist societies, I came to the conclusion that the purpose of communist propaganda was not to persuade or convince, not to inform, but to humiliate. And therefore, the less it corresponds to reality, the better. When people are forced to remain silent when they are being told the most obvious lies, or even worse, when they are forced to repeat the lies themselves, they lose once and for all their sense of integrity. To assent to obvious lies is in some small way to become evil oneself. One standing to resist anything is thus eroded and even destroyed. A society of emasculated liars is easy to control. I think if you examine political correctness, it has the same effect and is intended to.
That really helps us to understand that ideas have consequences. This is a serious issue. Communism which did so much evil in the world in the 20th century, took a view that said, hey, we're not going to convince, we're not going to inform, we're not going to persuade, right? That's really the Christian way. Instead, we're going to humiliate, and we humiliate, and it's better and more effective when the ideas or the propaganda don't correspond to reality. Mm-hmm. And when we unhinge from the truth, there's all kinds of harm that can be done. And so it's absolutely vital in the 21st century that we equip our kids with the truth.
Maven exists to help the next generation know truth, pursue goodness, and create beauty for the cause of Christ. To find out more, check out maventruth.com.